For the last few years, I've been following Narendra Modi across India. Because of the questions I've been asking and the news that I've been reporting, a group of Indian officers prevent us from entering the border region. My visa extension was originally denied. I've been followed and intimidated by authorities here.
Can't we just go in and film?
And I've been banned from events.
You need to give us a reason for why you've suddenly decided not to allow us.
India prides itself on its democracy, but Narendra Modi is its all-powerful leader, a seemingly invincible force.
Asking the wrong questions about his story and his life can land you in hot water.
Modi has led India since 2014. It's been a period of massive growth. India is now on its way to become a global superpower. It's the fastest growing economy in the world. It's also the most populated, a title it claimed from China in 2023. India's even landed on the moon.
India is on the moon.
My country is on top of the world.
And now Narendra Modi has won another term as Prime Minister, 5 more years. That'll make him the second longest serving PM in India's history.
So I want to know, what made Modi?
Because there's a myth to this man. At times, he's treated more like a pop star than a politician.
Prime Minister Modi is the boss.
Over 100 biographies have been written about him. There are even blockbuster movies telling the story of his life.
There are these little stories that are a little bit like kind of log cabin myths. He's meant to have swum across a crocodile-infested lake.
The swimming with crocodiles kind of aligns with that kind of imagery. Little boy was special. He was going to grow up to become, someone very important.
But how much of it is true? Or is it all to further his political ambition? When it comes down to it, who actually is Narendra Modi?
In Narendra Modi's home state of Gujarat in 2023, India and Australia were about to play a cricket match. The Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was there with Modi. They stepped onto a chariot and rode around the largest cricket stadium in the world. It fits 132,000 people, so it's big. The leaders were waving at the crowd while security in suits and sunglasses with rifles walked on either side. People held Indian flags and waved back adoringly. And there are some Aussies in there as well. It kind of feels like Modi and Albanese by his side are some sort of gods. I was one of the journalists travelling around India following the leaders on the visit, and it was wild to watch how much of a spectacle they were putting on to show that this relationship is blossoming between two democracies. But just before they mounted their chariot, an Aussie journalist asked Albanese a question.
Prime Minister, do you think a 2-all draw would be good for bipartisanship in the relationship?
I think it'd be a very good thing, but I understand that it will be a tough contest. It's very hard to win in India.
Then, as you do when you're a reporter, he asked Modi a question.
How important is cricket to our friendship, Prime Minister?
Well, we'll see something tomorrow that is better.
Later, we got a talking to. We were told no questions to Narendra Modi.
In the 10 years he's been Prime Minister, Narendra Modi's only done one press conference and answered one question in it.
That's very unusual for a country that's supposed to be the biggest democracy in the world. You're meant to be able to ask leaders anything and hold them to account.
Democracy is the idea that welcomes debate and discourse. In the evolution of the democratic spirit, India is the mother of democracy.
But Modi's become so powerful, his critics say the rules don't apply to him anymore. He seems to do what he wants.
A major part of being a democracy is having free and fair elections. And yeah, India does have a pretty amazing version of that.
We've just witnessed the biggest and most complicated election that has ever taken place anywhere in the world. 945 million registered voters cast their ballots at over 1 million polling stations from the Himalayas to the beaches of Goa. The Electoral Commission has 15 million staff, and to put that in context, there are almost as many electoral staff in India as Australia has voters.
But in the end, we all knew there'd be just one winner.
Narendra Modi's story begins in the northwest corner of India in a town called Vadnagar. We've come looking for Modi's childhood home and people that knew him growing up, people like Swami Modi.
By the way, everyone we met in Vadnagar is a Modi, but they're not related.
Swami was a baby when his mum died, so he moved in with his neighbours, Narendra Modi, his parents and 5 siblings.
What was the neighbourhood like which you grew up in?
कोई घर में कोई सुविधा थी नहीं लेट्रिन का भी नहीं तो बाहर जाते खुले में ताला में आए खुले चले जाते घर में एक बाथरूम था दूसरा कुछ था नहीं
Modi's house is not some grand mansion, but it's not like he was living on the streets or in a slum either. It's firmly average for this part of India.
I think the key to his rise is very much this projection of him as this humble person who's risen on his hard work, as opposed to the elites who've just gotten what they have purely because they were born in a family which was political or which was rich. And there's some truth to it.
Now, there's another important story that he talks about all the time.
Chaiwalas sell tea and you'll find them on every train on India's massive rail network, and they announce their presence on the trains.
As Modi tells it, he used to be a chaiwala with his dad, and it's a story that he's told over and over as he was climbing up the political ranks.
Over the years, some of Modi's neighbours in Vadnagar have said they can't actually remember Modi working at the chai stall with his dad.
Many researchers dispute the story though. Even Narendra Modi's brother, Prahlad, said he's been hyping up the tale, and while his father sold tea, the brothers didn't.
कहा जाए तो चाय बेचने वाले का बेटा कहना चाहिए, चाय बेचने वाला नहीं कहना चाहिए। ये पत्रकारों की गलती है।
So there's some disagreement about the details of his backstory, but there isn't much doubt that he grew up in a poor family, in a poor village. He isn't an elite. He's certainly not a Gandhi. Modi has used this to portray himself as a political outsider, a common man.
Many who knew Modi when he was young say he was strong-willed, even stubborn or arrogant.
और क्या है सब में होशियार था पढ़ाई में भी होशियार जो कभी-कभी टीचर के सामने भी ऐसे खड़ा हो जाए जो टीचर की भूल निकाल दे वो तो इंटेलिजेंस वाला तो जोरदार आदमी था वो पहले से ही ऐसा ही है आज अभी भी ऐसा है ना वैसे पहले से ही वो मुक्कम है जो करना वो करने का ही किसी के वो खिजायत में नहीं रहने का अभी भी वो अभी रहता भी नहीं है खिजायत.
When Narendra Modi was just 8, he found his way out of Vadnagar.
देखो ये कार्यक्रम जो जब से आरएस में जुड़ा है वो जब से कार्यक्रम यही चालू हुआ है तो मैं कहीं बनूं बस.
He joined his local branch of the Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh, or the RSS, a volunteer youth group training that promotes Hindu nationalism, what many researchers call an Indian far-right paramilitary group, something the organisation denies.
देखो ये कार्यक्रम जो जब से आरएस में जुड़ा है वो जब से कार्यक्रम यही चालू हुआ है तो मैं कहीं बनूं बस.
Just so you're across it, when India was founded in 1947 after it got independence from the British, its constitution was written to say India is a secular country, which means it has to be neutral and open to all religions. The word secular is right there on page 33 in capital letters. About 80% of India's 1.4 billion people are Hindus, but there are also millions of Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Buddhists and Jains. And the constitution gives all equal protection. But the RSS has other ideas. Its own mission statement commits the organisation to fulfil this age-old national mission by forging the present-day scattered Hindu society into an organised and invincible force. They want India to become the supreme Hindu state, a belief referred to as Hindutva.
This is someone as well who didn't have very much of a formal education. He doesn't seem to have done very well at school. And so the RSS takes over his education and then provides him very much with a political and organisational education.
And I think RSS's core vision, I think for them, it was that we need an India for Hindus. Have politics that looks at Hindu interests first. And that is really their defining philosophy.
These are the ideals that Modi grew up with and have remained central to his career. Since Narendra Modi became the leader of India 10 years ago, he's been pushing this idea that India, the secular country, is a Hindu-first state, enacting laws that critics say have marginalised and persecuted religious minorities. As Prime Minister, Modi's campaigned for Muslim religious sites to be replaced with Hindu temples, locked down India's largest Muslim region, Kashmir. The UN called a law his government passed in 2019 fundamentally discriminatory for leaving out Muslims.
Today, the RSS has millions of members around India, making it the largest far-right organisation in the world. At times, it can look a little bit like Boy Scouts. Every morning, members have to go to something called shakas or branches. They're an hour-long meeting and exercise camp.
हिंदुओं को जिंदा रखना है, हिंदुओं का देश है, तो हिंदुओं को ताकतवर होना बहुत जरूरी है.
Physical training and fighting exercises are a huge part of what the RSS does. They say it's about building a strong India, but researchers call it a paramilitary group ready to defend India at a moment's notice, something the organisation denies.
The purpose of RSS is to make a society where every individual is good, that follow moral values, that work for betterment of society. So when will we achieve this purpose, there will be no need of RSS. The whole society will be like RSS.
Even at that young age, Modi had big ambitions to get high up in the RSS. He'd need to prove his dedication to get ahead, but of all things, an arranged marriage was holding him back.
If you've paid attention to most world leaders, they'll always appear with their better half. It softens their image, showing them as a partner or a parent. Here's the thing, Narendra Modi's been married for more than 50 years, but he's never been seen with his wife. It was often dismissed as a rumour because no one believed a high-profile politician could keep something that big a secret.
तो शादी भी बाद में क्या है कि वो शादी नहीं करे तो पीछे लड़के रह जाए. इसी हिसाब से शादी भी कर देने को शादी करने की बिल्कुल मना है इनकी. तो क्या है कि पहले से घर कमज़ोर हुए इसी हिसाब से दूसरे कोई आए नहीं ना. और लगभग 15-16 छोकरे हैं सब. अब उसमें लगभग 8-10 की शादी हो गई थी. अब दूसरे रह जाए तो ये भी रह जाए ना. इसी हिसाब से शादी कर दिया.
When Narendra Modi was 3 years old, his parents promised him to a girl in a town a couple of hours away. He wasn't told about it. This wasn't a child marriage, it was just a commitment to them getting married later.
So now marriages have changed a lot in India, but in the earlier days, it was very essential.
So this is the voice of an Indian journalist, and she's one of the few people who's actually met Narendra Modi's wife. But she wants to stay anonymous because this could all lead to a lot of backlash for her here in India. Modi and his aides have gone to massive lengths to make sure that this story stays away from the public.
There are a lot of social taboos attached with mixed marriages or intercaste marriages and all of that.
Modi and his wife-to-be, Yashodaben, met when they were promised to each other at just 12 years old. When Yashodaben turned 17, they went through the religious ceremony of marriage. That's according to Modi's brother and Yashodaben herself. Narendra Modi hasn't ever confirmed or denied this.
These kids got married. Then what happens is the girl stays in the house of her mother till she starts menstruating. And once she starts menstruating, after that, then they have this, a big traditional ceremony and all that they had. And after that, the girl is sent to her husband's house to, consummate that relationship, and then their life starts.
A 2018 survey of Indian households found 93% of Indians were in arranged marriages.
And I want to make it clear, polls show most of them are happy. But in the 1960s, Narendra Modi just wasn't into it.
शादी करने की बिल्कुल मना थी इनकी। पर क्या है कि पहले से घर कमजोर हुए, इसी हिसाब से दूसरे कोई आए नहीं ना। और लगभग 15-16 हो गए हैं सब। उसमें लगभग 8-10 की शादी हो गई है।
So before Modi and Yashodaben could move in together, when Narendra Modi was around 17 or 18, he packed his bags and decided to leave home and the marriage.
To leave your family and your marriage is a big deal anywhere in the world. But in India, it's huge.
इनकी शादी 1968 में हुई और शादी के बाद डेढ़ महीने तक સુધી इधर रहे और रहे बाद में सब जो घर में बूढ़े आदमी होते हैं, हमारे पिताजी और इनके पिताजी सब बूढ़े होते हैं, इनको नमस्कार करते हैं और नमस्कार करने से बोल दिया इसकी औरत को कि भाई ये घर तेरा है और तू मेरी आज से बहन है और तेरे को रहने की छूट है घर में, ऐसे बोल करके वो निकल गए। देखो ऐसा है ना, जैसे शोक हो जाए ना, ऐसा शोक हो गया है। लेकिन इनके माँ जी, इनकी मदर है ना, वो एक उत्साही थी कि तू बढ़ता ही जा आगे और या माँ, बाकी दूसरे सब जैसे बेकार हो गए हैं।
As Modi rose through the ranks in the RSS, he proved his dedication to his work by showing he had no family ties. When he started running for elections, he'd have to fill out registration forms and he'd leave the spouse section blank year after year. In campaign speeches, Modi would actually say he was single.
शरीर का कण कण और समय का पल पल सिर्फ और सिर्फ आप लोगों के लिए है, देशवासियों के लिए।
She always remained an unknown quantity. Nobody knew that he was married. I think till probably about 2007 or 2008. That was when it started. Suddenly whispers started that he was married, and then this thing. Then people went in search of the wife.
Modi became chief minister of his home state in 2001, and when you get into a powerful position like that, people start digging into your past. A reporter found Yashodaben Modi in her Gujarat village in 2002, and eventually she decided to speak.
Prime Minister's estranged wife, Yashodaben, has filed an RTI application asking for an explanation of the sort of security that she gets from the government.
Well, the estranged wife of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Yashodaben Modi, if you can see behind me.
So it was clear Narendra Modi was not single, but he still managed to skirt around the issue and bury the story. It's pretty wild Modi could do that, right? Imagine a high-profile politician anywhere else in the world managing to get rid of the story that he had a secret wife. But it all came out during his first run for Prime Minister in 2014.
He was legally forced to go public about his marriage, and for the first time in almost 50 years, as he gave his nomination to run for PM in the spouse section, he said he had a wife named Yashodaben Modi. Opposition politicians took legal action against Modi for not disclosing information about his wife. He wasn't found guilty of anything.
To me, this part of Modi's story sort of sums him up as Prime Minister and the myths that surround him. For someone whose political brand is so much about Indian tradition, he ultimately went against that in his own life, leaving behind an arranged marriage and his family to pursue his political goals.
But before he entered politics, he followed his beliefs all the way across India to the Himalayas.
And this is where we encounter the next chapter of the Modi mythology, that he became a monk, or at least tried to be.
At the age of 17, Narendra Modi packed a bag, took as much cash as he could muster up and headed to Kolkata on the other side of the country from his home in Gujarat. His family says they didn't hear from him for 2 years.
He disappears across India at one point, travels to Kolkata and then up into the Himalayas. Modi, early on in his life, had developed an attraction to a particular Hindu revivalist called Swami Vivekananda. Vivekananda was a hugely important figure in India in the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And part of that was he set up a kind of monastic foundation in Calcutta, which is now spread throughout the world. Modi seems to have become interested in this and decided that he wanted to become a monk and devote himself to the mission.
Swami is the title given to Hindu monks, and this Swami, called Swami Vivekananda, changed Narendra Modi's life. He talks about him all the time. In 2012, he tweeted a quote from the Swami every day for a year. As Prime Minister, he's gone to his ashrams and meditated, unveiled statues of Vivekananda, and he constantly references him in speeches.
So I need to tell you about the Swami Vivekananda because Modi has made him a big part of his story.
In 1893, leaders from around the globe were invited to the World Parliament of Religions. The first ever meeting of religious leaders from all different faiths: Presbyterianism, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, most of the big ones. On the morning of the meeting, a bell rang 10 times for the 10 religions represented, and over 10 days, the leaders spoke about their beliefs.
But to this day, there is one speech that is still remembered.
Sisters and brothers of America.
Swami Vivekananda from India stood on stage wearing a turban and sandals.
I thank you in the name of the most ancient order of monks in the world, and I fervently hope that the bell that tolled this morning in honor of this convention may be the death knell of all fanaticism.
By the way, that's not his real voice. They obviously weren't doing live broadcasts in the 1890s.
Of all persecutions with the sword or with the pen, and of all uncharitable feelings between persons wending their way to the same goal.
Vivekananda was a hit. His words were printed in the paper and news about him spread.
Americans started getting into Hinduism. They took up yoga. More than 100 years after that speech, Swami Vivekananda is still hugely influential.
Even today, that very old speech is on YouTube and has racked up millions of views. His teachings are still studied around the world.
There are almost 300 Swami Vivekananda ashrams around the world. Most of them are in India, but they're also in countries like Australia, the US, Mauritius, Fiji, heaps of countries. When a teenage Modi left home, he went knocking on the door of these ashrams. I wanted to know what it would have been like and what Modi was looking for, so I went to one.
There's a giant statue of Swami Vivekananda out the front of the ashram. People are taking photos in front of it. There's a dining hall, accommodation, offices, a library, and in the middle, a temple. An ornate building that looks almost like an Indian palace with large domes on top. At each one, there are monks or swamis who give up everything like family and material things and dedicate themselves to spreading the word of Vivekananda.
Modi didn't just have an interest in the Swami Vivekananda. He wanted to devote his life to him. He wanted to become a monk. The story goes like this.
Modi turned up at Vivekananda's Kolkata ashram as a teenager. He walked in the door with his backpack on and his dreams of becoming a monk, and the story goes that he was turned away. The monk apparently said he needed a uni degree to join the ashram, so he moved on to others asking to become a student Swami, but he kept getting rejected. He says he still lived the monk life during this time, only accepting food he was given. He only had the clothes on his back. Modi claims he travelled to every part of India, reading the philosophy of Swami Vivekananda as he went. In one biography, Modi says he got to a third ashram, asking to be let in again, and one of the monks gave him a final rejection and said, "Your destiny lies elsewhere, and elsewhere you should seek it."
There's no evidence that suggests that he didn't go. And in fact, after he was elected in 2014, he goes back to the Ramakrishna mission and goes and prays there. He goes and pays respects there. He's welcomed by a lot of the monks that were there. Whether there were any that remembered him turning up and knocking on the door, I'm not sure about. But that's not to say that it didn't necessarily happen. I think it probably did.
Vivekananda is revered by almost everyone across India, so being inspired by Vivekananda isn't necessarily unusual for an Indian person, and particularly for an Indian PM, but some researchers say Modi takes it further. In the story Modi tells about himself, he says a monk put him on the path of politics. So he's set up this idea that as the Prime Minister of India, he's this divine leader. Sometimes he says he's making decisions that God told him to make.
He's very much a Hindu patriot, I suppose, nationalist in that sense. He's also somebody, though, who believes very much in the modernisation of India, at least in kind of economic terms and in some social terms as well. So he's an interesting figure in the sense that he tries to balance this modernising project with this cultural traditionalist project about the revival and consolidation of Hindu culture across India.
By the 1980s, Modi was well and truly on that path to power. He swapped religion for politics. He got involved with the political arm of the RSS, the Bharatiya Janata Party, or the BJP. And by 1985, he was in charge of coordinating grassroots campaigns. The BJP is powerful now, but at the start of the 90s, the party was kind of obscure and looking for an issue to get traction. So with the help of Narendra Modi, the party organised a yatra, a march across the country to a place called Ayodhya in northern India, and a mosque called Babri Masjid. It's believed the Babri Masjid was built in the 1520s by a commander working for Babur, an emperor for the Mughals. The mosque was built at the top of a hill in Ayodhya. Ayodhya is also believed to be the birthplace of Ram, who is one of the most revered deities in Hinduism and is considered the seventh incarnation of the god Vishnu. Hindu nationalist groups like the RSS and the BJP have long said a temple dedicated to Ram was destroyed by Babur to build the mosque. So for hundreds of years, it was a contested site.
In 1990, Narendra Modi was 40 years old at this point, and he helped organise a procession to Ayodhya. The aim was to build passion among India's Hindu majority and to get support for the BJP ahead of a crucial national election.
It started in Gujarat, Modi's home state. Crowds of Hindu right-wing activists walked 10,000 kilometres across the country, holding rallies in villages and towns as they went. It became one of India's biggest mass movements.
Tens of thousands of Hindu fundamentalists arrived.
The BJP's procession to the temple worked. The attention it brought the BJP was huge. In the 1991 elections, the BJP became the second largest party for the first time. It finally went from being an obscure party to one with power. On the 6th of December 1992, the mobs were revved up.
A Muslim mosque is the flashpoint tonight that could set India aflame with religious violence. Hindus are gathering to tear down the centuries-old shrine, with 250,000 troops barring their way.
BJP leaders made speeches like LK Advani, Modi's mentor. At about 11 in the morning, the crowd started chanting, "We will build a temple here." The huge police force which tried to control the crowds holds the barricades as long as possible. But there's the inevitable charge and tear gas. The mosque was cordoned off, but one man got past it and climbed onto the Babri Masjid and put up a saffron flag.
One of the Hindu volunteers has scaled the top dome.
A huge roar went up because one of the Hindu protesters managed to get inside, and the mob saw this as their sign to storm the mosque. People climbed on top of the 3 domes of the mosque and the police looked helpless. By about 5 o'clock that evening, it was all over. One report said that what remained of the mosque was a red cloud of dust.
Hindus and Muslims have always got on well here in Mathura, but since the events at Ayodhya, there's been a change in the mood. Hindu nationalism is in the ascendant. The Muslim minority fears for the security of its places of worship.
More than 2,000 people died in those riots. Most of them were Muslims.
जब किसी मकान में झाड़ू लगता है तो कीड़े मकोड़े कुछ उसमें से मरते रहते हैं, तो अगर ऐसी स्थिति आती है, कोई विरोधी हैं, तो उसमें कहीं किसी कोई चोट लग जाती है.
The BJP has constantly said the demolition was spontaneous, that the leaders there didn't incite the violence.
I describe that as the saddest day of my life. Till today, frankly, I do not know whether it was mob fury or a small determined group which did not agree with the leadership of the movement, who thought that this should be done.
The site was dormant and closed to the public for years.
But back in Gujarat, the chief minister of the state spoke constantly about the temple. That chief minister was none other than Narendra Modi.
जन्मभूमि मंदिर पर राम जन्मभूमि बनशे मन राम जन्म पर राम जन्मभूमि मंदिर बनशे दुनिया ने कोई ताकत राम मंदिर बनता फिनिश.
He made building a Hindu temple on that site an election promise.
In 2019, after years of legal battles over which religion should get the land where the Babri Masjid once stood, India's highest court found the demolition of the mosque was against the rule of law, but gave the site to Hindus anyway. The court offered land 25 kilometres down the road to Muslims to build a new mosque. Modi wasted no time making good on his promise to build a new temple there.
On January 22nd, 2024, I was there when Narendra Modi opened the first part of that temple, and it was a spectacle.
Air Force helicopters scattered rose petals across the temple. Modi lay flat on his face in prayer and finally broke his 11-day fast with some sweet milk given to him by a religious leader in the temple. He started his speech by saying the god Ram had arrived.
राम मंदिर के भूमि पूजन के बाद से प्रतिदिन पूरे देश में उमंग और उत्साह बढ़ता ही जा रहा है. निर्माण कार्य देख देशवासियों में हर दिन एक नया विश्वास पैदा हो रहा था. आज हमें सदियों के उस धैर्य की धरोहर मिली है.
Narendra Modi has turned this issue that once tore apart the country into a legend that so many Indians want to be a part of.
मेरे साथियों, आने वाला समय अब सफलता का है. आने वाला समय अब सिद्धि का है. ये भव्य राम मंदिर साक्षी बनेगा भारत के उत्कर्ष का, भारत के उदय का. ये भव्य राम मंदिर साक्षी बनेगा भव्य भारत के अभ्युदय का, विकसित भारत का. ये मंदिर सिखाता है कि अगर लक्ष्य सत्य प्रमाणित हो, अगर लक्ष्य सामूहिकता और संगठित शक्ति से जन्मा हो, तब उस लक्ष्य को प्राप्त करना असंभव नहीं है.
That moment, standing in front of all those people, is in many ways everything Modi has worked for.
It was a moment that nearly didn't happen. 12 years earlier, there was a violent event that still haunts Modi to this day.
On February 27, 2002, the Sabarmati Express, a train carrying Hindu pilgrims returning from the site of the demolished Babri Masjid, was attacked. 59 people lost their lives in a fire that broke out in one of the train cars just outside the station of Godhra. Narendra Modi was the newly installed Chief Minister of the state. It was his first major political position. He'd only been sworn in 5 months earlier.
The train fire was a tragedy, but it's also really contested and confusing because there have been so many investigations into it.
At the time, some police said a Muslim mob surrounded the train and set it on fire. But in 2005, an Indian government investigation found the fire was an accident. 3 years later, in 2008, a special court backed up what the police said originally and found thousands of locals did it on purpose. 2 years after that, in 2011, another ruling. An Indian court found 31 people guilty of murder over the fire, saying they had pre-planned the whole thing. 11 of them were sentenced to death. An independent tribunal of judges also came to the same conclusion, and some researchers have as well.
So you can see what really happened and who was responsible isn't particularly clear.
The bodies of the victims of the train fire were laid out in public for people to see in Gujarat's largest city, Ahmedabad. The day after the train fire, people marched into Muslim communities. They had weapons. They started attacking Muslim businesses and homes.
Mob justice is ruling the streets of Gujarat. Youths are rampaging through the western state's commercial capital, Ahmedabad.
आधी एक कलाक के अंदर देखते देखते वो पब्लिक बेकाबू हो गई पूरी। पब्लिक भी बहुत ज़्यादा हो गई थी और वो पब्लिक एकदम से बेकाबू हो गई और जो जहाँ पर जैसा जिसके हाथ में आया फिर वो पब्लिक एकदम कंट्रोल बार हो गई। और सिस्टम भी उस टाइम पे बंदोबस्त इतना ज़्यादा था कि जितना पुलिस होनी चाहिए थी उतनी थी नहीं। पब्लिक के सामने पुलिस कम पड़ गई थी, तो वो लोग भी अपनी चीज़ में सफल नहीं हो पाए, पुलिस वाले भी। अब वो भी अपनी जान बचा के आगे पीछे हो गए और जो दंगैये लोग थे उनको एक मौका मिल गया और वो लोगों ने जहाँ पर भी उनको समझ में आया जितना हो सका उतना उन लोगों ने नुकसान करा। जानी भी, माली भी, मिल्कियत का भी बहुत नुकसान हुआ, जान का भी बहुत नुकसान हुआ और समाज का भी नुकसान हुआ, देश का भी नुकसान हुआ।
The riots went on for 3 days. Official figures say more than 1,000 people died, mostly Muslims. Others estimate more than 2,000 people were killed. Tens of thousands of properties were set on fire, women were raped. It was brutal and one of the worst communal riots in India ever. While the majority of violence was against the Muslim community, there were reports of retaliation attacks on Hindus as well. After the riots, human rights groups and opposition parties accused Narendra Modi's Gujarat government of being complicit in the riots, with claims that police said, "We cannot help you, we have orders from above."
ये भाषा ठीक नहीं आपकी। मैं 2007 तक हर व्यक्ति को हर सवाल का हर समय जवाब दिया है।
A criminal case was filed against Modi, saying he didn't do enough to stop the riots. The court found there wasn't any evidence to find him guilty, and India's top court said the claims Narendra Modi's government didn't do enough were wrong.
I want to make it clear, no Indian authority has ever held Narendra Modi responsible for the riots. But to this day, there are still questions he doesn't like to answer.
India today, on 2 separate occasions, has declared that you are the most efficient chief minister. And yet, despite that, people still call you to your face a mass murderer, and they accuse you of being prejudiced against Muslims. Do you have an image problem?
The interviewer is Karan Thapar. He's one of India's most famous TV anchors. He was interviewing Modi on India's local CNN channel, and yeah, that was his first question, a pretty big one.
I think it's not proper to say that people. There are 2 or 3 persons, those who used to talk in this terminology. And I always say, God bless them.
The interview goes back and forth. Modi's not giving him much.
I'll have to rest.
Then Modi starts looking away. He's like, "I have to rest." He points at something off the camera and starts taking his microphone off. The interviewer asks if he wants water, and Modi says in Hindi, "Let's keep the friendship intact." It's hard to hear, but Modi's saying, "I can't do this interview," and he gets up and leaves. The interview lasts all of 3 minutes.
That interview's been watched millions of times. It's constantly going viral and it's now become a meme here in India.
A few years after the riots, Modi was trying to get on with the job of Chief Minister of Gujarat. He was applying for a visa to go to the US, but his visa was denied. It was under a law which stops foreigners from going to America if they've committed what they call particularly severe violations of religious freedom. He was banned from entering the US for 10 years. The UK and European countries put in similar bans too. But Narendra Modi powered through. He goes on to win the 2007 election, his third victory in Gujarat. During his time leading the state, he favoured privatisation and small government. He reduced corruption and set up technology and financial hubs, and he says he offered land to big companies like Indian company Tata Motors. And he finished the job of bringing electricity to the whole of Gujarat. The state's GDP grew 10% a year during his time in office, and Gujarat topped the World Bank's list of ease of doing business. In 2012, he wins the election again. He's just so popular.
Modi's popularity in Gujarat gained him the attention of the national wing of the BJP. And in 2013, he was announced as the candidate for Prime Minister for the next election.
Just half a second, we need to go to these pictures. That's Narendra Modi at the BJP headquarters. Let's just listen in.
कि श्री नरेंद्र मोदी को आगामी लोकसभा चुनाव के लिए प्राइम मिनिस्ट्रियल कैंडिडेट के रूप में प्रोजेक्ट किया जाए.
He ran on this stance of not only being an anti-elite guy, but one who could get rid of corruption and bring economic progress like he'd achieved in Gujarat to the whole of India and get jobs for normal Indians.
For people who are sick of seeing powerful and corrupt leaders, Modi was a refreshing new face for the country.
He obviously won that election hands down.
It's one of the most crushing defeats in India's political history. For the first time in 30 years, a single party will be able to govern in its own right.
As Prime Minister, Narendra Modi has spoken a lot about giving poor people better living conditions, like this program he introduced in his first year as PM called the Clean India Mission to give every Indian a toilet.
नीतीश जी और सुशील मोदी जी के नेतृत्व में बिहार ने जो कार्य बीते दिनों करके दिखाया है, उसने सभी का हौसला बुलंद कर दिया.
At the time, India had the highest number of people in the world who defecate in the open, mostly in rural places. In 2019, Modi said he'd succeeded.
साथियों, देश में बिहार ही एकमात्र ऐसा राज्य था जहां स्वच्छता का दायरा 50% से भी कम था.
And by this year, Modi says 37 million houses have been built under his leadership, with 20 million more in his next term.
While India's economy has gone up and down under Narendra Modi, it's now the fastest growing in the world.
So in economic terms, the Modi government over the last 10 years has delivered some successes and has also had a lot of setbacks. Reforms in the banking sector that seem to have made that much more secure, and it's delivered growth rates of 6 or 7%.
As Narendra Modi got more powerful in the world, the UK and European countries lifted the bans against him travelling there, which were put in place after the Gujarat riots. He was asked to come back to the US. Just last year, he was invited to a prestigious state dinner with President Joe Biden. It's a full 180.
In my 2.5 years here in India, I've seen the country change. Someone once described it to me as like being in the bottom of a lift going up, because this country has elevated under Narendra Modi.
I covered so many Australian ministers visiting the country, and 2 visits by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. And in my time here, Modi went to Australia too. That's a lot of meetings to build this relationship between 2 countries. But with the rise of China, Western countries like Australia are looking for allies. They're willing to look past the flaws and warning signs. India might have 100,000 newspapers and 380 television stations, but most of them are owned by just 2 people, both close friends of Modi.
Which means not many people ask the difficult questions.
On the latest index of Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom report, India's at 159 out of 180. behind countries with self-declared autocrats and military dictatorships.
And I've got to say, I just found out why firsthand.
A couple of months ago, I got a call from someone from the Indian ministry saying my routine visa extension application had been denied and that I have to leave the country. He specifically said it was because of a story I did on Sikh separatists. He even referenced this podcast you're watching now. For weeks, we were followed. We were denied entries to events. We were stopped from filming.
I didn't think I'd experience something like that in the country that calls itself the world's largest democracy.
I've been in the room when Modi speaks to a crowd a lot of times now, and it feels like you're at a music festival with the biggest artist in the world playing. People are obsessed. It's hard not to get caught up in it. Not everyone is happy though. There are a lot of people who no longer feel safe in Narendra Modi's India. They feel like they don't have a future here. Many people feel too scared to speak up or ask the hard questions for fear of backlash.
As I come to the end of my time here, it's obvious that there are many Indians who feel like Narendra Modi has improved their day-to-day lives. And he might just make this country a developed one and the next big superpower, but at what cost?
The way it stands now, it'll be a tough job for anyone to rival him for the top job anytime soon. Modi's entire life has centred around being India's leader. Right now, it looks like it will stay that way for as long as he wants.